case. Now, when we are talking of mitral valvular uh, valve apparatus, is it a tricuspid or is it a bicuspid valve?
Bicuspid.
Okay. So the components of mitral valve is the leaflet, the annula surrounding it, the chorda tendineae, the papillary muscle, and the adjoining myocardium. So these are all the components of mitral valve. And when there is any pathology or pathological changes you get, we land up with either mitral stenosis, mitral regurgitation. In mitral valve prolapse, the the mitral leaflet is what? There is a myxomatous degeneration and it will be flayed. So with this background, we'll go to the first topic of mitral stenosis. Now, stenosis means there is a constriction, that is the blood which has to flow from left atrium to left ventricle. The valvular, there is a what is a normal circumference of your mitral valve?
4 to 6
Yeah,
centimeters
4
square,
to
ma'am.
6 centimeters square. So usually what happens is that is when it decreases less than 2 centimeters square, that is when the pathological changes happen. When it is less than 2 centimeter, what happens is when at rest, the dynamics of that heart, the blood flow, all is normal. But once the patient goes in for exertion or some stress event like fever or anemia or any ischemia, whatever it is, some severe sepsis or infections, which is going to, what happens is when the demand becomes more, then the patient may land up with symptomatic phase. So with this background, we'll go to mitral stenosis. Now, what is mitral stenosis? Obstruction to left ventricular inflow at the level of mitral valve. This is due to the structural abnormality of the mitral valve apparatus. Now only we spoke about this mitral valve apparatus. Now this is due to thickening and immobility of the mitral valve leaflets. And the normal mitral valve orifice, circumferential surface area is 4 to 6 centimeters square. Now, what happens is once a rheumatic fever and there is a recurrent rheumatic fever which causes my changes, no, the pathological changes. So, in a period of time, what happens is this thickening and immobility till the circumferential the reduction occurs up to 2 centimeters square. It may be asymptomatic even to up to 1.5. No, it may be asymptomatic, but less than 1.5 it becomes severe, and when it is less than 1 centimeter square, it is very severe mitral stenosis. So the etiology is always rheumatic in origin. So we already spoke in last class of rheumatic heart disease. The commonest valvular involvement is the mitral valve, and after rheumatic fever, the first presentation will be mitral regurgitation. But after two decades, that is, rheumatic fever occurs, and suppose the patient is not in primary prophylaxis or secondary prophylaxis or discontinuous, no, it by 2 decades from the presentation of rheumatic fever, they land up with mitral stenosis. Nowadays, we have good treatment strategies available, but in previous era when the treatment was not very good and all, from the onset of symptomatic mitral stenosis to death is only up to 4 to 5 years. Usually all patients die between that period. But now with good modalities of treatment and better education of patient and a better follow-up, we see the longevity is very good with mitral stenosis, provided they follow our advice and we also identify early and give appropriate treatment. So in older people, it can be caused by heavy calcification of mitral valve apparatus. That is very rare. As far as mitral stenosis, when you are going to be in clinics, when we ask you what is the cause, it is always rheumatic unless very rare. Okay. And that too clinically, we are not going to be able to make out, especially this congenital mitral valve stenosis. Other causes are SLE, rheumatoid arthritis. Now, left atrial myxoma actually will cause obstruction to the blood flow, and it is one of the rather DD for mid diastolic mama. So in all cases, that is 40% of rheumatic heart disease presents with pure MS, and it is and usually there is a history of rheumatic fever. Now, when we go to the pathophysiology, so you should understand that the valve is in between left atrium and left ventricle. So, so once it is causing, when it is less than 1.5 or so, there is decrease in, that is, mitral valve annulus. At certain stage, the left atrial pressure starts rising. Initially, it will be only on stress. After some time, it occurs even at rest also as the condition worsens. So what happens? The compensatory phase is left atrial enlargement. That is, it is a compensation to attempt. This is to lower. We don't want the increased left atrial pressure. So it is a pathophysiology. So there is a change happening. Now, this increased left atrial pressure is transmitted to the pulmonary venous system. At the same time, the LA remodeling occurs, which is not good. So, there is a left atrial enlargement, increased left atrial pressure. Now, so whenever there is a heart rate, which is the sinus node, SA node. So where is SA node situated?
Right atrium.
Right atrium. Now, what is the when you go into the anatomy of right and left atrium, there are many points in the atrial musculature which can have capacity to give impulses. So whenever there is a remodeling of left atrium, so there are many points which will start giving impulses. So when the lot of impulses start coming, this thing, no, it ultimately leads to atrial fibrillation. Now, why does this atrial fibrillation lead to a leg clot?
Stasis, ma'am.
Yeah, very good. So it is an ineffective contraction. Okay. Now, what is the normal heart rate is 70 up to 100 per minute. No, less than 60 is bradycardia, more than 100 is tachycardia. Now, in atrial fibrillation, what is the atrial rate?
About 250, 300.
300 to 600 is the rate of in atrial fibrillation. In flutter, it is 200 to 300. Now, this so much, no, it is 300 to 600. So you can imagine the amount of, so it will more be like an electrical activity, and but the mechanical, the activities is very minimal. So what happens is there is a stasis of blood, and hence LA clot occurs. Then when there is increase in the left atrial pressure, now what happens? It is transmitted to the pulmonary venous system. So in due course, there is pulmonary congestion. Now, because of pulmonary congestion, so what happens? The response is there is increased pulmonary vascular resistance. In due course, it lands up with pulmonary hypertension. Now, at this stage of pulmonary congestion, this is the stage where we are going to get that exertional dyspnea, which is one of the hallmark symptoms of your mitral stenosis. Now, in early stages of mitral stenosis, that is, patient may be in the what do you call, patient may be in 1.5 or something, but still, when there is a sudden exertion or exercise or some fever or some stress, no, the patient may land up with pulmonary edema. But as the process goes on, it is a slow, as I said, the rheumatic fever may not repeatedly attack the person, but the pathological changes continue. So the stenosis is worsening. There is a further calcification, further fibrosis, further narrowing. So what happens? The lung starts adapting. How does the lung adapt? It starts first is there is pulmonary venous resistance, then arteriolar resistance increase, and finally they land up with pulmonary hypertension. When this full blown, when there is a pulmonary hypertension becomes from mild to moderate to severe, what happens is the pulmonary edema events start coming down. It is only in acute stage you may get recurrent pulmonary edema. Now, once the pulmonary hypertension starts mild to moderate, this pressure starts seen in the right ventricle. So you will have a right ventricular pressure overload. So this will be seen in the form of right ventricular hypertrophy. Now, after certain stage, this right ventricle is going to dilate and fail, and we'll see the full-blown picture of right ventricular failure. What are the signs of right ventricular failure? Clinically, how will you make out?
This bilateral pitting pedal edema,
Yes,
congestive hepatomegaly.
yes, congestive hepatomegaly, raised JVP, and all the features congestion. So you know that they're full-blown right heart failure. Now, so with significant obstruction, now what happens? There is a pulmonary venous resistance. So there is a pulmonary hypertension and mitral stenosis. Now all this, what happens is the cardiac output is decreased. Already there is from LA to LV, the pressure LA has to pump more for the blood to reach LV, and then LV goes to the stroke volume has to come out, right? So that is how what happens. First, to exercise, as I told you, initially to exercise, then even at rest, the cardiac output is decreased. So this will be clinically seen as fatigue, dyspnea, and decreased. What they say is in mitral stenosis, not only the what I told is you're right, your pulmonary hypertension, even the alveoli, there is alveolar edema, interstitial alveolar edema. When that is there for a prolonged period of time, it leads on to fibrosis. So the lung capacity itself decreases after a certain stage. So coming to the symptoms. So why this symptom occurs? So this is a very good self-explanatory slide which shows. So the hallmark or symptoms of mitral stenosis is easy fatigability, breathlessness, with your what do you call edema, situs when right heart failure occurs, orthopnea, and hemoptysis, then your palpitation with atrial fibrillation. So the characteristic symptoms are all these. Now, why does breathlessness occur? So breathlessness on exertion, one of the first few symptoms which will be happening along with easy fatigability. So breathlessness is one due to pulmonary congestion and two due to low cardiac output. Initially, it will be on, according to your New York Heart Association classification, it will be grade 1 breathlessness, which slowly progresses and may become grade 4 breathlessness. And there is easy fatigability. This is this breathlessness, fatigue. Both are the symptoms which will occur in mitral stenosis as well as in mitral regurgitation. In mitral stenosis, why there is easy fatigability is because of the low cardiac output. So what happens is, because of the left atrial pressure starts rising. Normally, the left atrial pressure is around 0 to 5 only. So when it rises beyond 25 millimeter of mercury, this pressure backlog goes to the pulmonary vasculature. Now, what happens is more amount of the left atrium has to pump for the blood to reach the left ventricle. So, if you see a patient with the pure mitral stenosis, the apical impulse will be normal in position. What is a normal position of apical impulse?
Ma'am, in the left fifth intercostal space.
Yeah, left fifth intercostal space, half an inch
Half an inch
medial to the
clavicle.
midclavicular line. Okay, so it may even be in the fourth, it may be shrunken, fourth intercostal space, half an inch medial. So that amount of left ventricle, no, because there is no blood itself which is coming to the left ventricle. Then because of right heart failure, we'll have features of dependent edema, pitting pedal edema with ascites, congestive hepatomegaly, raised JVP, all these will be there. Now, hemoptysis. Now, hemoptysis, so there are a lot of causes of hemoptysis in mitral stenosis. One is because of pulmonary congestion, two because of pulmonary hypertension. Then when there is a thromboembolism, when there is a rupture of bronchopulmonary vessels in the initial stage of mitral stenosis. Now, these mitral stenosis patients are more prone for, because of pulmonary congestion, increased respiratory tract infection. So, any winter bronchitis, there may be hemoptysis. Then acute pulmonary edema, they may present with pink frothy sputum. And that is also again hemoptysis due to, pulmonary edema. Then in a long standing, no, there may be like a minor bleeds and also hemosiderosis, and that may itself cause hemoptysis. Now cough, usually exertional cough and breathlessness usually is there. That is because of this pulmonary congestion. Now they always give complaint of some vague chest pain. It will not be like anginal chest pain. It will not be like your, please talk about pericardial pain and all. No, this will have some vague chest pain. Now, what they explain is it is due to this pulmonary hypertension. And when palpitation develop in mitral stenosis, palpitation is due to atrial fibrillation. One of the commonest cause of your atrial fibrillation is your mitral disease, mitral valvular disease in the form of mitral stenosis and mitral regurgitation because of enlargement of LA, and later on there will be enlargement of RA. Now, as I said, atrial musculature, there are a lot of electrical activities going on. So when there is a remodeling and enlargement, each part will start giving impulses, and hence they land up with atrial fibrillation. In fact, paroxysmal atrial fibrillation will be the first event for which patient will land up with pulmonary edema and may present for the first time to the casualty or to the hospital. Second thing is when patient develops anemia. So normally compensated group will become decompensated, and they may land up with exertional dyspnea or in pregnancy. When there is a high output state going on, these are the three situations when the person who was apparently asymptomatic may land up as acute as pulmonary edema. Now, what are the signs what you are going to see? So we'll go according from like inspection, palpation, percussion, and auscultation when we go. On inspection, apical impulse will be in normal in position. As I said, LV is not involved in your isolated pure mitral stenosis. So what will be there? Suppose if there is a pulmonary hypertension, on palpation, you may get a loud P2. And you may have a mid-diastolic thrill may be present. And what is this mitral phases? Can somebody explain what is that mitral phases? Anybody know?
Pink purplish phase due to decreased cardiac output.
Yeah, because there is a low cardiac output, no, they'll have that almost like a cyanotic hue will be there. It's not exactly cyanosis, but there'll be a cyanotic hue. This is because of low cardiac output. When we auscultation, so when we talk about in auscultation, the typical findings in mitral stenosis, when you auscultate the mitral area, the S1 will be, the first heart sound will be loud. Then it will be followed by a first heart sound will be loud, second heart sound normally heard, then there'll be an opening snap followed by a rough rumbling, low-pitched mid-diastolic murmur with a pre-systolic accentuation ending with a loud S1. Now that is how typically a mitral stenosis patient will have. Now, why do you have a loud first heart sound?
Due to increased velocity or forces that open and close the valve, ma'am.
Yeah, so when it has to, it is like a door, no, comes and bangs when the wind is blowing. So when it comes from a long distance, it makes a big sound that is there. The opening snap, because the stenosed valve, when it suddenly opens up, it will cause there is a opening snap is heard. And this S2-OS gap usually narrows when the mitral stenosis severity increases, and the mid-diastolic murmur, the duration also increases. Now, why is that pre-systolic accentuation? What is that due to?
Atrial contraction.
Atrial contraction. So when there is an atrial fibrillation, this pre-systolic accentuation disappears. Now, this opening snap is a high-pitched sound. This mid-diastolic murmur is a low-pitched sound. Mid-diastolic murmur best heard in the fifth, that is in your mitral area. Opening snap is in between the mitral area and the left sternal area. The opening snap will be heard well. Then, of course, you will have features of, it's not left heart failure, wrongly written, because of failure, that is because crepitations, that is because of pulmonary edema. Then, because of the right heart involvement, you can have pleural effusion. and you can have a loud P2 when there is a light right ventricular hypertrophy occurring. The apical impulse may be pushed out, but not down, and you may get a right ventricular heave. And when you auscultate this pulmonary area, you may hear a loud P2, and on palpation, you can feel for the palpable second heart sound. So this is the diagram which is given in your Davidson. Basically what I have taken all is from mostly from Davidson. So this is your left atrium, this is your left ventricle, there is a stenosis, and the blood has to cross the stenosed valve. So what happens? One dilated left atrium, then your right ventricular hypertrophy, LV is normal. Usually RV will be very thin. Here it is so hypertrophied. Then later on, no, in a very severe mitral stenosis, there will be increased pulmonary arterial pressure. So in X-ray, you can see dilated pulmonary artery. Then, so when you auscultate, S1 is, will start. So S1 is loud. There is S2. There is a narrow gap between A2 and P2. Then this is followed by opening snap. Then mid-diastolic murmur with a pre-systolic accentuation, ending with a loud S1. So usually best heard in the left lateral position, because since it is low pitch, you have to use the bell of the stethoscope at the apex. And here you can see the stenosed valve. This is what is stenosed valve. And when you do a colored Doppler, usually it should be blue. When this blue and red is mixing in, there is a turbulence of the blood flow. So once you have diagnosed a mitral stenosis, and whether it's associated with a failure, congestive cardiac failure, or whether it is having atrial fibrillation, and is there any infection like infective endocarditis, something is present or not, all that we'll have to make out, and then we are going to go for the investigation. So in ECG, so the feature of right ventricular hypertrophy, you can just remember this much, that is enough. That is when tall R wave in V1 to V3. Normally R wave will be small in V1 to V3. If it is tall, it indicates right ventricular hypertrophy. Then P mitral or atrial fibrillation. P mitral means the P wave is before QRS complex. Now if the P wave is more than 2.5 millimeter, that is it is broad, then we call it as P mitral. When atrial fibrillation occurs, the P waves disappear, but you will have a undulating lines which will appear, that is you call it as fibrillatory wave. Now in chest X-ray, what are the features you will see is you can have a straightening of the left heart border, that is because of enlarged LA appendage, and you will have signs of pulmonary venous congestion. What are the signs of pulmonary venous congestion? You can have a inverse mustache sign, that is the pulmonary vessels will be prominent in the apical region, and you can have curly B lines in the near the periphery, that is will be vertical short lines because of interstitial edema. So that features will be there in chest X-ray. And echo is very important point, transthoracic echo, which will pick up the thickened immobile cusp. With the, you can measure the valve area, you can see the enlarged left atrium, and we can measure the reduced rate of diastolic filling of LV, and we can assess what is the degree of mitral stenosis severity and confirm. Doppler will confirm the pressure gradient across the mitral valve, the pulmonary arterial pressure, so we can confirm whether it's a moderate or a severe pulmonary hypertension, and it will give us a clue of left ventricular function. Normally, the left ventricular function will be normal. Now, before going for any surgical procedure, suppose you are planning for surgery, so we'll have to also look for if there is any associated coronary artery disease, and suppose if coronary artery disease is there, when we are going for surgical intervention, we will have to plan accordingly. So coming to the management. So suppose if it's a pure mitral stenosis without any complication. So penicillin prophylaxis for secondary prevention of rheumatic fever for at-risk patient. This will be your number one answer. Then next is, of course, we have to restrict sodium intake and take oral, minimal dose of oral diuretics. Suppose a patient is in atrial fibrillation, then there is a role of beta blocker, calcium channel blocker like verapamil, diltiazem, and digitalis like digoxin. That is to reduce ventricular rate in patient with AF. If a patient with mitral stenosis with a normal heart rate, there is no role of digoxin. When do you use digoxin in mitral stenosis? Only in the presence of atrial fibrillation. Now, this is a frequently asked question in the clinics, and you should be very clear in what you're answering. The role of warfarin. What is the role of warfarin?
Ma'am, to prevent any blood clots, ma'am.
Yes, one
Due to
that
atrial
is when the
fibrillation.
atrial fibrillation is setting in. So that is the time you start giving warfarin. So what are the surgical management available? You can have either mitral balloon valvuloplasty, which can be closed, that is, or open, and mitral valve replacement. So now we have to carefully send the patient. So when do you signal? If the patient is asymptomatic, there is no role of surgical intervention. When the patient becomes mild symptom, that is NIHA classification 1 to 2, then your medical management is suffice. With careful secondary prevention, the patient usually survives for a long time. Suppose the patient is going for NIHA class 3, that is significant. So this is the time you are going to think in terms of interventions. Or it is an isolated severe mitral stenosis. There should be no or trivial MR. That is an important point before you are going for valvuloplasty. And it should be a mobile, non-calcified valve. Even the subvalvular apparatus should be non-calcified, which can be assessed with your echo. And left atrium should be free of thrombus, because post-surgical, the patient will land up with thromboembolic events like stroke and all. So we don't want that to happen. So they do a very careful evaluation. One is transthoracic or transesophageal echocardiogram also is done to confirm that there is no thrombus before going for this procedure. So this procedure is very successful in a what they call experienced hands and all. It is very successful procedure. And usually the longevity, like 10 to 15 years, they may be free of symptoms. Mitral valvular replacement should be done if this above features, means there is calcified valve associated with MR, then you have atrial fibrillation with thrombus, then there is no other point. They'll have to go for mitral valve replacement. So this completes our mitral stenosis. Now we are going to go to the next topic, that is mitral regurgitation. Now mitral regurgitation, that is, as it says, that is the blood which is from the left ventricle will regurgitate back to the left atrium. Now there, in stenosis, the blood from LA is not able to come to LV. Here what happens is, the blood which has come from LA to LV, now it's going to regurgitate back to LA. So in the effect, what happens is, each time the cycle continues, there's a blood which comes, regurgitates back, again it's coming. So the LV also starts feeling the what do you call, the pressure, increased load. So the stroke, so how does the heart compensates? By beating fast, and the stroke volume also will be high, means initial period. So as days goes on, what happens is the decompensation starts occurring. The regurgitant flow to LA will cause giant left atrium, and hence you can have atrial fibrillation. Then this back pressure is going to cause pulmonary hypertension, right heart failure. So here you have mitral regurgitation patient, you will have a combination of right heart and a left heart failure. So this is how the features of left mitral regurgitation is going to be. So it is otherwise called as mitral insufficiency or mitral incompetence. It's a disorder of heart in which the mitral valve does not close properly when the heart pumps out blood. So what happens is, abnormal leaking of blood from the left ventricle through the mitral valve and into the left atrium. So what happens? So the blood is going to regurgitate back to the left atrium. Now, one of the most common form of valvular heart disease is mitral regurgitation. Now, what are the causes of mitral regurgitation?
And the rheumatic fever, post
Okay.
MI.
Okay, very good.
Mitral prolapse.
Mitral valve prolapse, rheumatic fever, MI. Then what are the other causes? So already we spoke about the mitral valve apparatus, where we said one, the leaflet, then the annulus, then the chordae tendineae, then your papillary muscle, and then the myocardium surrounding the papillary muscle. So
And
any
left ventricular dilatation also.
excellent. So your left ventricular dilatation. So it is not a structural abnormality. Even the functional abnormality is going to cause mitral regurgitation. Now, going back before, sorry. So when we spoke about my MDM, that mid-diastolic murmur, what are the differential diagnoses if there is a MDM in a mitral area?
Caricum murmur.
Okay, very good. Caricum murmur, where do you get? Rheumatic fever. Okay, then
Austin Flint murmur, ma'am.
Austin Flint murmur, where do you get?
Yes, ma'am.
Acute,
Regurgitation. AR.
aortic
AR,
regurgitation, AR. Okay, that is where you get. Then what are the other differentials if there is MDM? Can it be a flow murmur?
Yes, ma'am, due to hyperdynamic circulation.
Yeah, so in MR also you may get a MDM. Okay, but
Stills murmur, ma'am.
Enama?
Stills murmur.
What murmur?
Stills.
Stills murmur is a systolic murmur in the pulmonary area. Okay. Where do you get that Stills murmur?
In children in anemia, ma'am.
Yeah, children in anemia. It's just a flow murmur. Okay, now this is a diastolic. Any diastolic murmur is organic. Okay, but you can have a MDM murmur which can be functional, but it is a part of some other disease complex. As we rightly said, one rheumatic fever we told, then acute AR, then MR also you can get MDM. Then like any high flow state like ASD, VSD, ASD will not get. VSD also, when there is high flow state, you may get an MDM. But how do we differentiate that this MDM is not due to mitral stenosis? It will not be associated with opening snap. There will not be any presystolic accentuation. The first heart sound may be normal. Okay, so I forgot to mention. Now coming to mitral regurgitation. So mitral regurgitation, there are so many etiologies. So one very important, the leaflet, no, you should never forget the mitral valve prolapse. Then when there is a dilatation of left ventricle and the mitral valve ring, that like in coronary artery disease and cardiomyopathy. Or it can be due to the damage to the valve cusps or chordae, that is rheumatic heart disease and infective endocarditis. Ischemia or infarction, that is ischemic heart disease of papillary muscle, and it can also be due to coronary artery disease, that is myocardial infarction. Now, apart from, so these basically form all the causes of your mitral regurgitation. Now, this class, in a sense, is very important because in clinics, I think cardiology CVS case is always rheumatic fever, or if it is a mitral regurgitation, see, nowadays we are not having a lot of rheumatic heart disease related cases. So, but because of this ischemic heart disease, we have a lot of MR. So, mitral regurgitation may be definitely, maybe 75% of you students are going to land up with mitral regurgitation as your bedside case. So you should know everything about this. Now coming back to mitral regurgitation, it can be due to one rheumatic, okay, that is due to valve cusp chordae. There is thickening, shrinking, all that damages which will happen and cause mitral regurgitation. Second is ischemia. So what happens when there is ischemia is initially there is damages which may be, so small damages going on, which will cause minor changes in your chordae and all that, chordae tendineae, which the alterations start occurring. When there is, as we already spoke about, unstable angina, and sometimes the ischemic event may be very high. So there may be sudden rupture of chordae tendineae and they may land up with acute MR. Now, there is a difference when you have an acute mitral regurgitation and a chronic mitral regurgitation. Now, when there is a chronic mitral regurgitation, there is some amount of blood is regurgitating back to LA. Now, it goes over a period of time. So, the left atrium starts accommodating by increasing in size. Left atrium, in fact, mitral regurgitation, you have a giant LA. That is a typical feature of mitral regurgitation. But in acute MR, that is when there is an unstable angina, already you call it an acute on chronic ischemic heart disease. So when there is sudden rupture, LA is normal in size. So when suddenly so much blood regurgitates back to LA, the LA will not be able to compensate, and they may land up with flash pulmonary, left ventricular failure and a flash pulmonary edema. In fact, acute MR is a very, like acute AR, it is a very life-threatening condition. Whereas in a chronic mitral regurgitation, the compensation goes on and patient will slowly present. Of course, there may be some acute event like anemia, myocardial infarction, stress like fever, infective endocarditis, which will precipitate from a stable to an unstable condition. So mitral regurgitation has 3 stages. One is acute, chronic compensated, and chronic decompensated. Now, I'll tell you. So when there is flail leaflet, or when there is a sudden chorda tendineae rupture or papillary muscle rupture, this flail leaflet, you get it in mitral valve prolapse. Now, when because it keeps prolapsing, at certain stage, what happens is the stretch occurs to the chorda tendineae. So at certain stage, they may rupture suddenly. So that is why that 3 features has been written. So what happens? There is abnormal reversal of blood flow. It is an acute process from left ventricle to left atrium. So it lands up with acute mitral regurgitation. Now what happens is there is a sudden large volume load imposed on left atrium and left ventricle, which is normal size and compliance. Now still the compensation has not occurred. So what happens? You will get increased left atrial volume, sudden raise in left atrial pressure, so pulmonary congestion. There is a decreased forward stroke volume, and so to compensate for that, there is increased heart rate. Your diastolic component becomes reduced. So ultimately, there is decreased cardiac output. So now, when there is a decreased cardiac output, what is the pathophysiological response? There will be an increased vascular resistance, peripheral vascular resistance. So all this, a patient with acute MR may present in state of shock, which is very difficult to manage. Now, this is one scenario. Now, this is chronic MR, common in your rheumatic heart disease or ischemic heart disease, whatever, when it is worsening gradually over a period of time. Now, here, the volume load is imposed both on left atrium and left ventricle. So what happens? There is increase in left ventricular end diastolic pressure, increase in the left atrial pressure. Now, what is the compensatory changes which occurs? There is a dilatation of left atrium and left ventricle to accommodate volume load at lower pressure. This helps to relieve pulmonary congestion. So what happens? You get an apical impulse which is down and out. You start developing left ventricular hypertrophy stimulated by left ventricular dilatation. So this, because of this increased wall stress, that is the Laplace law, comes into picture. Now, what is the next step? There is increase in the preload, left ventricular hypertrophy, reduced or normal afterload, and low resistant LA provides unloading of LV. What happens is most of the blood, because LA is dilating very rapidly, all the blood is going to the low pressure area, that is to the LA. So the stroke volume is now very less, but we need oxygen, right? So what happens? The stroke volume, it will compensate and start giving large total stroke volume. So what is the normal EF? We already spoke. Ejection fraction, not
65%.
65%. And so this compensation will maintain the supranormal EF and maintaining this normal forward stroke volume. As long as there is no, this balance goes on, fine. But at some stage, when any acute event like a fever, a patient with anemia, a myocardial infarction, or anything, any stress is going to upset all these findings. But this is a vicious cycle which keeps going on. And finally, once the MR starts, this vicious cycle goes on. So we typically say MR begets MR. The MR, it's worsening. So in which there is further LV, annular dilatation, increased mitral regurgitation. Again, this whole thing goes on. It becomes a very big vicious cycle which is going on. Now this is a vicious cycle. So at one stage, what happens is the ejection fraction starts coming down. There is an increase in end systolic volume. Contractile dysfunction starts occurring because of this remodeling which is happening because of increase in the left ventricular size. You have an increased left ventricular end diastolic pressure, increased volume, increased left atrial pressure. So finally, there will be pulmonary congestion, pulmonary hypertension, and there will be reduced forward stroke volume, reduced cardiac output. So patient have easy fatigability, dyspnea on exertion. Grade 1 would have become grade 4. So with all this pathophysiology back in mind, now we understand what are the symptoms which will occur. So it depends on the phase of the disease. This acute mitral regurgitation, which occurs suddenly, will have signs and symptoms of decompensated. So they'll present with typical congestive heart failure. They'll present as a cardiogenic shock. So they may, or like chronic MR, they'll present with gradual increase in shortness of breath, or they may present acutely as pulmonary edema, orthopnea, paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. All this we discuss in our clinics. All this will come as stages of worsening. And apart from that, it's a low cardiac output state. So there is decreased exercise tolerance, and there'll be palpitation, LA dilates, and easily they'll end up with atrial fibrillation. One more thing is okay, so next. So what happens is chronic compensated mitral regurgitation may be asymptomatic. They'll be asymptomatic for long period of time with a normal exercise tolerance and no evidence of heart failure. This occurs until that systolic dysfunction of LV develops. That is the time when they start developing this fatigue, dyspnea on exertion, or shortness of breath. With time, what happens is palpitations occurs because of atrial fibrillation and also because of chronic atrial dilatation. This will be the course of event. Finally, severe LV enlargement, more severe disease. So we say MR begets MR. So finally, they'll come with a full-blown symptomatic congestive heart failure with pulmonary congestion and edema. At this stage of LV dilatation, this myocardial dysfunction often becomes irreversible. So our aim is we'll have to catch our patient at this stage, and that is from asymptomatic to the symptomatic phase when they are precipitating, and give them a good medical management. At least if they go to further stage, if there is any interventions, it can be done. But once they land up, I said that ejection fraction normally is 60%. So the heart will try to compensate and maintain that ejection fraction. Suppose if a patient with 60% ejection fraction, mitral regurgitation, they take an echo and give us that the ejection fraction has become 50%. Now, normally for a healthy individual, 50% may be due to mild ischemic event, then usually they recover very well. But in a mitral regurgitation patient, if ejection fraction is reduced even to 50%, it has a very grave connotation. So what are the signs once you examine the patient? Because of atrial fibrillation, you may have irregular heart rate, a giant LA will be present. Because of cardiomegaly, LV enlargement, you will have down and out apical impulse, and you will have a pansystolic murmur. Now, what is this pansystolic murmur in mitral regurgitation? So it is in the mitral area. You'll have a soft S1 because the valve does not close properly with the pansystolic murmur throughout, starts with S1 and covers S2. Now, why is it pansystolic in nature? That is, has the same that sound, whereas in pulmonary, when aortic stenosis and all, we have a ejection systolic murmur, which has a crescendo and decrescendo fraction. Here, the LA and LV, the pressure is equal throughout the cardiac cycle. That's why you have this pansystolic nature with a soft S1. And it ends with apical S3 because of rapid flow of blood into the left ventricle. Presence of S3 indicates severity of mitral regurgitation. And other features you'll have is basal crepitations, and in pulmonary edema you can have coarse crackles. Of course, pleural effusion when there is right heart failure present, and you can have this parasternal heat, features of pulmonary hypertension, JVP raised, and this bilateral pitting pedal edema, feature of right heart failure. So here what happens, again this is a picture from Davidson. So here there is a dilated LV. RV hypertrophy has started occurring. There is LA also starts dilating, and because of this regurgitant lesion, there is a the LA is also started to, left atrium started to dilate. So here S1 is soft. We have a same intensity pan systolic murmur, which ends with the second heart sound, and this S3 is the rapid ventricular filling, which will be heard as an S3. Usually this pansystolic murmur radiates to axilla and back. So usually the leaflet is involved is usually the anterior leaflet. If posterior mitral leaflet is involved, the radiation is not to the axilla but to the base of the heart, that is around the pulmonary area. So when you see the echo, this LV is dilated, LV, that left atrium is so big, LV is also dilated. And if you see the blood flow, there is a regurgitant blood flow which occurs in the left atrium. So this is what is the picture in Davidson. So now we have confirmed the diagnosis of mitral regurgitation, whether it is associated with congestive heart failure, whether there is atrial fibrillation, and then we are going to look for the complication, whether there's infective endocarditis and all that. We are going to confirm. Your diagnosis should be having all that. Now when you go to investigation, ECG, you will see features of left atrial hypertrophy, that is like P mitral only. You will have a broad P wave. In atrial fibrillation, we'll have fibrillatory waves, and left ventricular hypertrophy features will be there in ECG. That is tall R wave in V6 and deep S waves in V1 and V2. If we add the deep S1 S waves in V1 or V2 plus tall R waves in V5 or V6, it should be more than 35 millimeter. So when you come to the clinics, we'll just show you how you do it. When you see the chest X-ray, you'll have a enlarged LA, enlarged LV. Then there is a pulmonary venous congestion and pulmonary edema if it is an acute. So what is the X-ray feature of pulmonary edema?
Bat wing appearance.
Very good. So bat wing appearance. Other X-ray findings, I think it's a separate class in itself to be discussed. And echo will show, like already I showed you, dilated left atrium, left ventricle. You can, so you have to see for the LV, if it is functional or dysfunctional, all that can be there. And what are the structural abnormalities, whether it's a mitral valve prolapse or it is due to rheumatic heart disease or due to annular dilatation or due to this chorda tendineae rupture, that is the papillary, all that can be made out by your echo. And Doppler will quantify the amount of regurgitation which is occurring. And as any procedure, before doing any surgical procedure, they do cardiac catheterization. One, to find out this coexisting coronary artery disease, because when they are going to do a surgery, they'll when they are going to open, if there is a associated CAD, even that procedure can be done. And it's also, it is a very good technique of identifying the, accurately identifying the degree of pulmonary hypertension. Now, so once you have diagnosed, so you are going to treatment. So in when we are going to treatment, there is medical management and surgical management. Medical management, if a patient comes with acute MR, so it is like, you have to see like any other patient, airway, breathing and circulation, and that is separate. Now we'll talk about this chronic MR. So when there is a chronic MR, first we have to give a afterload reducing agents and diuretic. What afterload reducing agent can be given?
Nitrates.
Nitrates, no. Nitrates only in ischemic heart disease. It is a very short acting drug. What is the drug of choice in congestive cardiac failure?
Diuretics, ma'am.
No. Vasodilators. ACE inhibitor. Okay. Should never forget ACE inhibitor. The answer for that question of What is the treatment for congestive heart failure will be your ACE inhibitor. So that is ideally can be given in for as a afterload reducing agent, and diuretics. This is for LV dysfunction. Beta blocker, like in ischemic heart disease as a cause of your MR. And in acute MR, we'll have to go for, if there is a hemodynamic compromise, it has a very grave prognosis. So there's intra-aortic balloon pump and all to increase the blood pressure. Now, when there is atrial fibrillation, beta blocker, calcium channel blocker, digoxin, or a combination of this. Again, when you see the management which I have given here, you see that digoxin is not number one. You should always remember digoxin has a role, but it is not the drug. What is the action of digoxin?
It will increase the contractility, ma'am.
Yeah, so positive chronotropic, positive inotropic, and it will reduce the heart rate. How does it reduce the heart rate?
Vagal stimulation.
Yeah, so that is that AV region, no, it will increase the block from atria to ventricle, no, it will increase the what do you call the block between atria, the impulses which comes to atria to the ventricle. Now, normally our heart rate, no, be more than 100. Why are we worried when a patient has a tachycardia?
Prevent conversion of atrial fibrillation to ventricular fibrillation.
Very good. So simple is to prevent atrial fibrillation to ventricular fibrillation. Normally, what happens as the tachycardia occurs, no, your diastolic component is reducing, gets compromised. So the oxygen to the oxygen to the heart is going to go down. So that compromise will start coming. And second is, so we have to maintain around 60 to 100. So ideally, suppose if all the impulses, I told that atrial fibrillation, the heart rate is around 300 to 600. If all that comes to the ventricle, what happens? It will immediately go to ventricular fibrillation. So it will be an ineffective contraction and immediate death can occur. So that is where your beta blocker, calcium channel blocker, digoxin, or a combination can be given. So in a patient with atrial fibrillation, you have to go for anticoagulation. And usually infective endocarditis prophylaxis for mitral regurgitation is more important, but it is like any other protocol which is followed for infective endocarditis. Now surgical, we have either mitral valve replacement or repair of leaflet perforation or annuloplasty. Now based on, suppose the patient is in NIHA grade 2, grade 3, if the left ventricular capacities dysfunction is not so severe and the patient will tolerate the procedure, then ideal is always your repair of leaflets, or if there is annular dilatation can be planned for annuloplasty. But suppose ejection fraction has gone down below 30%, at that point of time there is no role of surgical procedures in mitral regurgitation. So ideally we should pick the patient early and ideally give a good medical management with a rheumatic fever. If it is a rheumatic heart disease, rheumatic fever prophylaxis to prevent further worsening. At the right time, they can go for this mitral valve repair, which has a very good, at least very good, they have a good quality of life for 10 to 15 years. Now the third topic in mitral valve disease is your mitral valve prolapse. So usually what is the cause for mitral valve prolapse?
Marfan syndrome.
Yeah, very good. So it can be genetic. Either it can be idiopathic when there is a myxomatous degeneration and leaflet, no, it will balloon into the left atrium, or it can be due to Marfan syndrome. What are the other syndromes? One is Marfan.
Barlow syndrome.
Barlow, okay. Then osteogenesis imperfecta and other conditions where you can have mitral valve prolapse. This mitral valve prolapse, usually, otherwise, what is it called? What are the other names? One is Barlow's, then click murmur syndrome. So why do you hear the click? Because the leaflet, no, when it because it is that redundant of the extra leaflet, it will go from left ventricle to left atrium and suddenly stop. So that tension is heard as a click. It can be only as a click or a click with a late systolic murmur. Now, when it goes on for a prolonged period of time, suddenly the chorda tympani can rupture and it can present also as acute MR. In our country, still the commonest cause of mitral regurgitation is your rheumatic heart disease. But whereas in Western population, where your rheumatic fever has been controlled well, there nowadays now mitral valve prolapse is the commonest cause of mitral regurgitation. Now, the symptoms, if they are associated with MR, you'll have features like mitral regurgitation. But otherwise, usually it is commoner in females and they may present with chest pain. They may have arrhythmia, and they say that sudden cardiac death is more in mitral valve prolapse. Treatment wise for mitral valve prolapse, if it is only click or late systolic murmur, the mild is there. So reassure. And for chest pain, you can give some symptomatic management or a beta blocker and can be sent. But suppose if mitral regurgitation is there, which is significant, mild to moderate or significant, they can go for mitral valve repair, where they can be done either open or by percutaneous method, and the repair can be done in a good hands. So I think I cover everything about mitral valve disease. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. So now I think so any doubts or
Ma'am,
yeah.
ma'am, is there anything known as acute MS and acute AS?
No.
No, ma'am. Okay.
No. Acute AR is there, acute MR is there. It
Okay.
takes time for stenosis to develop, whereas regurgitation can occur suddenly.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, doctor. So I think we finished this class, and next class is on Thursday, where we have aortic valve disease. I think all the topics which I took for this past 1 month is very important in your clinics as well as in your theory. So there's no more doubts. We may wind up and yeah.
This is a bit unrelated, ma'am, but I was wondering if ejection fraction falls below 30%.
Yes.
What are there any special precautions the patient must take, or is there something?
Yeah. So now, suppose if it is we are talking of mitral regurgitation, and this ejection fraction less than 30%. Now these patients are more prone for arrhythmias. As I already told you, we are going to give medical management, but we cannot expect good quality as such. Some amount of disability will be there, but at least we can prevent the arrhythmias. They suddenly go for all these electrical abnormalities and sudden death occurs. So you can go for this resynchronization therapy. So what they do is, no, CRT, have you heard of it?
Cardiac synchronization.
Yeah, so what they keep is, they keep like pacemaker, no? So once the arrhythmia sets in, it will give like a shock, and it prevents the arrhythmia to develop. So it at least prevents the sudden cardiac death in such group of patients, apart from our medical management.
This is only for mitral regurgitation patients, huh? Those who have a high risk of arrhythmia.
Not only mitral, any ischemic heart disease patients who are more prone for arrhythmia.
So any patient with ejection fraction less than 30, they're vulnerable for arrhythmias, no?
Yes. Less than 40% itself, the arrhythmia vulnerable. That is why we give beta blocker. But when already so severe congestive heart failure, you have to be very careful about beta blocker also. This is a situation, very tricky situation.
Okay. Any reason, ma'am, why low ejection fraction means more arrhythmia, ma'am?
Because see, your left ventricle has to pump normally. So much damage, the remodeling has occurred so that it is not able to pump.
Oh, okay.
So we know that much damage is there. So the electrical abnormalities are more in such group. So it gives us an indirect clue that your left ventricle remodeling has occurred and it's in such bad shape.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you all. We'll meet on Thursday. Thank you all.